Hi everyone, Joellen here, and welcome to Washed in Watercolor. My lesson for today is how to paint a child in watercolor. At my school, the New England School of Fine Art, I feel it's very important to explore all types of subject matter. So in this lesson, I'll touch on how I typically would draw out a portrait, how to mix skin tones, a technique for painting hair, and of course, capturing this beautiful smile. Using a 2B pencil, I will begin by establishing the shape of the face. I'll try to pay attention to any type of rotation that I'm seeing or the tilt of the head, and I'll establish simple landmarks such as the eyebrows, the placement of the eyes, bottom of the nose, and the bottom of the top lip. Starting off, it's always a good idea to work a 1-to-1 ratio. That way you can use dividers to measure each section to make sure that you're on track. I always find drawing a child to be a bit of a challenge since their features sit much lower within their face as compared to an adult. So it's really good to have some ways to measure to make sure that you're understanding what is in the middle of the head. It's probably more the eyebrow compared to an adult where it would have a relationship with the lower lid. As I continue to develop my drawing, I'll do my best to keep my lines very light and movable because I want to be able to adjust them as I'm going along. There are some interior cast shadows, such as on the neck, to the right and left of the smile, a little bit under the eyes and nose, and I want to be sure that I draw these in a very accurate way. Overall, I'm happy with my drawing, so I'll now apply some PBO masking fluid, and I'm using an incredible nib to do this. I'll put masking on the two highlights in the eyes, the tip of the nose, some of the teeth, around the shirt collar, around the ruffled sleeve, and also in the headband. There are also some fine wispy hair, so I'll use my incredible nib to get those little highlights. The colors I'll be using for today includes Windsor Lemon, Yellow Ochre, Windsor Orange Red shade, Windsor Red, Quinacridone Magenta, Ultramarine Blue, and Burnt Sienna. The brushes I'll be using today include a Princeton Neptune quill, two Rosemary Series 402 pointed rounds, a Princeton script brush, and a Princeton 1/4-inch flat brush for softening edges. I'll begin by prepping some colors, including burnt sienna with a touch of ultramarine blue, some yellow ochre with a little bit of Windsor Orange Red shade, and then using clean water, I'll wet the face, neck, and ears, avoiding the eyes and avoiding the teeth. I'll carefully add a light wash of the colors that I prepared. And I really want to think about rounding the form. So I'll add some of the burnt sienna with the ultramarine on our right-hand side to put that more in the shadowed area. And I'll add a little bit more color, including a touch of Windsor Red to the area on our left. I am working pretty fast and I'm working wet into wet, which I've done in many of my lessons because I love working wet into wet watercolor, but it does pose some challenges and you just want to keep wiping your brush off in between, hopefully avoiding a blossom as you're kind of poking some paint into the area. I want to think about the little puffs that are under the eyes, so just gently getting those a little darker. And I'll add some ultramarine blue to my burnt sienna mixture and keep it more on the blue-gray side and paint the sclera or the whites of the eyes. Using that same mixture of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna but less water, I'll start to paint in some of the details of the eyes, including the top eyelid, the crease, and the iris, which is the colored part of the eye. Continuing on with that same mixture, I'll start to paint the eyebrows. And here's an important tip. You really have to pay attention to how the eyebrow hair grows. So when it's more towards the center or midline, the eyebrow hairs will grow up. And then as it pushes out to the side, they'll kind of herringbone together. Add a little bit of Windsor red to that dark mixture and paint the two corners, the recessed area of the mouth. Using more Windsor red and Windsor orange, I paint the inner areas of the ear. Watercolor always dries lighter than anticipated, so I will go back in and start to darken areas of the face. And I'll just work wet paint on a dry area and continually soften the edges with a damp brush. Mixing together my burnt sienna with some ultramarine blue and then some of my reds and oranges and that in a lot of water. I go in and just give a little bit of a tint to the teeth. In general, our foreheads tend to have a little bit more yellow in them, and our cheeks and nose a little bit more red, and then our jaw area picks up a little bit more gray. So here I am darkening this again, and but I'm adding a little bit of my yellow ochre into the forehead, some Windsor red into the cheek area, and then more of the burnt sienna with maybe some red and a little bit of ultramarine blue into the jaw. I now start to add in some of my cast shadow shapes, and those shadow shapes are located under the nose, and in the cheek area, that nice smile line. And there's a cute little dimple, so you don't want to miss that if you're painting along. And you can see how this really starts to transform the portrait. At this point, I feel I need to get some of the hair in. So using that combination of burnt sienna with some ultramarine blue, I'll start to kind of dry brush in some of the hair. I did add a touch of Windsor red to that, but I feel the hair really frames the face and it will change the look of the value of what's going on and give me just a better idea of where my skin tone stands. Picking up a little bit of Windsor lemon along with some ultramarine blue with a touch of burnt sienna, I'll just put a very light wash for the white shirt. Okay, so are you ready to have some fun? I'm putting out a little bit of burnt sienna directly from the tube with some ultramarine blue, and I'm just mixing it up until I get to like a pretty blue gray. And then with clean water, I wet my background. And then I just plop in some of the color, and you really want to vary this. I'll pick up a little bit of my Windsor lemon and add that to the mixture. And I just want to create a beautiful vignette around this little girl. And then mixing those two colors again together, but with less water and thicker paint, I'll start to paint in the outer area of her hair. And I guess my thought and my goal is to have some really beautiful soft edges. So that's why I wanted to do this whole process together. So at this point, the background is still wet, but I am working more of a dry paint onto a wet area. So it's really nicely holding the form, but giving me a soft edge. Painting a smile and teeth can definitely be a challenge. So typically the top lip is always a little darker than the bottom lip because it is a plane that turns under. And it's very difficult to paint teeth because you can actually make the teeth look more like chiclets if you paint all the spaces in between. So it's much easier to go and think about the gum, the separation at the top between the teeth. This method will give a much more realistic impression. I now take off my masking using a rubber cement pickup. Once the masking is all off, I use my 1/4 inch Princeton brush to soften any edges that seem too harsh. Using my small script brush, I had a few more details to the eye and the little puffin area under the eye. If you're ever interested in seeing my work in person or purchasing a piece, my work, both oils and watercolors, may be found at Gallery Antonia in Chatham, Massachusetts. I feel like I could go on forever with all these little details. I'm really happy with how this came out, and I hope you enjoyed watching this and maybe painted along or learned something. I always appreciate your support, so please remember to like, subscribe, and comment too. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.